In this video, we're going to look at external respiration and internal respiration. Remember that external respiration is the exchange of gases between the alveolus in the lungs and the blood, and internal respiration is exchange of gases between the blood and the body tissues. Before we look at the actual exchange of gases, we need to talk a little bit about gases. We're going to be talking about partial pressures of these gases. So we're going to talk about the partial pressure of oxygen in an area or the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in an area. What we mean by that is just the pressure that that one specific gas is exerting. So any mixture of gases is going to have, each gas is going to be giving a different pressure in that mixture. So when we look at these partial pressures, we're just looking at the pressure exerted by one of these specific gases. The other thing we have to talk about is solubility. And solubility is just basically how easily a gas can dissolve in a solution. And when we're looking at carbon dioxide versus water, carbon dioxide is much, much more soluble in a liquid than oxygen is. And this is going to come into play when we see how carbon dioxide travels much more easily in the blood than oxygen does. That's because of its solubility in liquid. So looking at external respiration. So remember, external respiration again is between the lungs and the blood. So this is where oxygen is going to go from the lung into the blood, and where carbon dioxide is going to go from the blood into the lungs. So when we're looking at this, just remember that this is going to be a simple diffusion process, and whenever something goes through diffusion, it's just going to go from an area of high to area of low. So in this case, the partial pressure of oxygen in the lung, in the alveoli, is going to be about 100 millimeters of mercury, and the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood that's coming back from the body is going to be about 40. So if we look at these numbers, we can see that 100 is greater than 40. So oxygen is going to go down its pressure gradient from the alveoli into the blood. You can see that by the time the blood gets down here, the partial pressure here is up to 100, so it's reached equilibrium. Now, in the lungs, equilibrium, this blood is going to reach equilibrium with the lung about a third of the way past the alveoli. And that is so that if the blood flow increases, we still will have enough time so this blood can travel 3 times more quickly than it is at normal, and we would still pick up the same amount of oxygen. So just in case the blood flow increases, there's an emergency, the blood starts flowing more quickly, we're still going to fully saturate the blood. We're going to reach equilibrium with the oxygen levels here. Still in expiration, external respiration, now we're going to look at carbon dioxide transport. So here you can see that the partial pressure gradient here is not as steep. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the venous blood is 45. Partial pressure in the lung is only 40. But because the solubility of carbon dioxide is much greater in liquid than oxygen, we're still going to have almost an equal exchange of carbon dioxide to oxygen. So we're still going to get rid of a whole bunch of carbon dioxide, even though that partial pressure gradient isn't as steep. Some factors that are going to be influencing this external respiration: the thickness and surface of the respiratory membrane, as well as something called ventilation-perfusion coupling. When we look at a healthy lung, the respiratory membrane is going to be incredibly thick, and the respiratory membrane is also going to have a huge, huge surface area. If we have a diseased lung, the respiratory membrane could thicken, so it's going to make it harder for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse as easily. And also, if some alveoli are damaged, then we're going to lose some of that surface area for gas exchange. The second thing, ventilation-perfusion coupling, basically is just looking at, we want to match up the alveoli that are getting a good amount of air and are really, really healthy. We want to match up those alveoli the ventilation with perfusion, which is the blood flow. So we want to basically send the blood flow to the alveoli that are working the best, which kind of makes sense. We don't want to send blood flow to an alveoli that is sick or has a thicker membrane, and we're not going to get as good gas exchange. We would rather send blood to alveoli that are nice and healthy so that we can get the good oxygen from them. So this picture is just showing here is an alveoli that is not working very well, so we don't want to send blood flow here, so we're going to constrict the vessels going to that alveoli. And here you can see that we're not sending blood to that alveoli that's not functioning very well anymore. Over here we have a nice healthy alveoli, so we're going to dilate these vessels in order to send some nice blood to that alveoli to be oxygenated. Internal respiration, again, is the opposite of external respiration. This is going to happen in the body tissues, and this is where oxygen is going to go from the blood to the tissue cells, and carbon dioxide is going to go from the tissue cells into the blood. The partial pressure gradients are basically just flip-flopped here. So in a lot of diagrams, you'll see the partial pressure of oxygen in the capillaries at 95. Other pictures you'll see, or other sources will say 100. So you can remember 100 or 95 here, whichever one is easier. So partial pressure of oxygen in the blood here is going to be really high, about 100 millimeters of mercury. Partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue cells is going to be about 40. So oxygen, again, is going to go down its gradient from the blood into the tissue cells. On the other hand, the partial pressure gradient for carbon dioxide is also going to be flip-flopped. So carbon dioxide in the tissue cells is going to be about 45. Carbon dioxide in the blood, the partial pressure is going to be about 40. So here carbon dioxide is going to go from the tissue cells down its gradient into that capillary to be returned to the lungs.